So I'm going to try and make this short and sweet, even though it's like 26 slides. I'm going to move through it pretty quickly. I'm actually playing a little bit of catch up here. Okay, so just to check, everybody online hear me okay? Yep, okay. So yeah, let's see, where are we? So I should be doing storage formats. What I'm going to do, I actually need to cover the mailbox lecture because I forgot about quiz 1 getting in the way of that. So I'm going to do the mailbox lecture, and then I'm going to push storage formats over here, and I'll zip through that really fast on Friday. And this one I'll just do today, kind of normal-ish, but a little bit quicker so you can get back to your assignments. This is kind of stuff you're already doing anyways, so you know, you're gonna be like, why is Matt talking about something that I'm already working on? But there is a little bit of extra information here, so I'll kind of zoom through the bits that I think are redundant. So, okay, so we know the mailbox role, we know the edge role. Edge role's coming later. Mailbox is right now. Oh, blinky lights. We do need a priest. Holy water. Okay, so we know what the mailbox server role does. It does pretty much everything these days, but really here we're talking about its core functionality, okay, which is, you know, the management of mailboxes and mailbox databases, right? So, you know, there's other things like handling connectivity, which used to be part of the client access role and is now just part of the client access service, right? But it really is our kitchen sink. So this used to be a role by itself, CAS, but it's also been bundled in now. Some other things, it handles SMTP mail flow internally for the organization and externally. Okay, and content inspection for things like spam filtering, antivirus, as well as other more, I wouldn't say niche, but just more esoteric uses. Okay, which we'll get into actually. So during this course. So tasks related to the mailbox server, configuring and managing a mailbox database, which you've probably already done a little bit of now. Configuring and managing mailboxes, which you've probably already done. Managing public folders, really nobody's touching those much anymore unless it's a legacy setup, okay? But this was a place to share data between mailboxes, okay? Outbound mail flow, this is something that you're gonna have to deal with in Lab 1. Mostly it just works, but it's possible right at the end of Lab 1 that everything looks great and then you're not able to go out because you don't have a send connector that allows you to send outside the organization. So that's one of the things that you can manipulate with the mailbox server role. Another thing is accepted domains. This is not really coming into our usage here, but let's say you have a company that merges with another company, and they're going to take over their mail. They can accept mail on behalf of that organization, right? And normally, the server will just be like, that's not my domain. But when you add it into accepted domains, you're saying, yes, it is your domain, okay? So you can actually have lists of them that you're accepting for various purposes. But, you know, merging companies can be one of those. You can also do things like, you know, configuring the message size limits. So some Yahoo decides to try and send an attachment with, you know, a gig attachment, like say a PST file. And, you know, that's going to, if enough people do that, your server is going to jump up and down. And you're like, oh, I better put some size limits on these things so that before it actually chokes the pipe, you can actually, you know, the server can go back and say to the user, no, we're not accepting a file of this size. So that could be attachments, but it could be message sizes as well. Those are two separate considerations. Okay, so configuring and managing a mailbox database. This is really where all the mailboxes are stored. It's not necessary to have separate databases, except for the fact that there are size limits. So you can get up to about 2 terabytes, and then you got to have a new mailbox database. It can also make sense to physically separate out different functions with different mailboxes, right? So like I had us do legal, executive, and then everybody else. I was just kind of to show you that it could be split out in that way. It would kind of make sense that legal would have its own little affair. It's not particularly necessary, okay? But certainly if you have different organizations within your umbrella, you might want to split those out separately, right? Like different domains that you're dealing with, for example. Okay, creating new mailbox databases. I think you've probably already done this at this point, but the thing I want to kind of highlight here, you can do it through either EAC or EMS. This is the command for EMS. The thing is, you do have to specify where the log folders, where the log folder is. And so if you don't specify anything, the mailbox database and the log folders are all going to go into a common location on the C drive. This isn't what we want, okay? So we have to specify a log folder path and an EDB file path. If we don't do both, if we, let's say we just specify the EDB file path, that'll tell us where the database should be, and the logs will just go to the default location, which will probably fill up your C drive eventually, okay? So just something to think about. It's better to have it on alternate storage, alternate fast storage ideally. You may have noticed that once you create a new mailbox database, you have to restart the Exchange Information Store service. If you don't do that, it won't let you mount the database, okay? When you do restart this, though, everything's going to be dismounted temporarily, so there's a brief period of downtime. Users shouldn't notice this, okay? Because really what's going to happen is that the server's just going to keep logging everything it's supposed to do, and then it'll play catch up once the service is back, right? So it kind of conceals it all from view, so the user doesn't notice. Removing a mailbox database, well, first of all, you got to get rid of all the active mailboxes. So you can disable all the mailboxes or you can delete them. Just keep in mind, if you delete all the mailboxes, you're actually deleting the accounts in Active Directory. So disable, usually you just don't want to do that. So you can do, if you just want to move a mailbox, you know, get mailbox dash database, blah, type it into new move request and where you want to put it to, right? Yeah, there's not too much more to do than that. In terms, and then you take the original one, you can just delete it once it's empty, right? Mounting and dismounting. There's not that much to say about that either. Sometimes you got to do it manually, especially if you're dealing with some kind of storage issue. So, you know, you should have seen that coming, but if you don't, it's going to automatically dismount some databases just to save them, okay? So in that case, you fix the issue and then you can remount everything. But it's going to be a manual process. So the system's not going to just assume, oh, everything's great now, let's go for it. Once there's an issue, it'll dismount and then it's going to leave it to you, okay? There are plenty of other maintenance operations, backups, etc., that can require dismounting and remounting. Some of it happens automatically and some of it doesn't, okay? So if it's an unexpected event, you're going to be called in to fix it up at the end just to make sure everything's clean, okay? I'll say something about mailbox databases. They're very much like file systems, okay? So if you've ever like pulled the plug on a system and then you boot up and it's like your file system is dirty, you have to do a check, right? You got to do similar stuff with mailbox databases. If something happens to them that's unexpected, like the C drive fills up or whatever storage you have, and it doesn't know whether it's safe, it's going to mark it as unclean, and then you've got to do a check on it, okay? And that's usually a manual process on the part of the administrator. This is, when your VMs blow up, this could be one of the reasons, okay? So let's say your VM, you shut it down too fast, like a hard shutdown. That could actually cause all your mailboxes or some of them to be labeled as unclean, and then it just won't let you mount them until you fix it up, okay? Now, there's a few things, this is kind of obscure. I don't know if you're going to encounter this these days, but there's this concept of logging called circular logging. which is just the idea that after a while, you're going to rotate your logs, you're going to delete the old ones and make room for new ones. Okay. Um, that's not the default behavior in Exchange. Exchange will let those logs grow forever. Okay. And the recommendation is actually keep it that way. Now, some people decide, honestly, we've been running this for 20 years. We're just gonna, we're gonna introduce limits. But it can cause problems. And the reason that it causes problems is that the logs that you're keeping are actually transaction logs. And how I mentioned that it's very much like a file system, modern file systems do exactly the same thing, which is there's a little rule in teaching. It's like, tell them what you're going to talk about it, tell them what you talked about, right? Uh, Transaction logs are the same way. You write into the log what it is that's going to happen, then you execute it, then you write into the log, okay, it's been done, right? That's the idea. So you're basically saying, you're announcing your intentions and you're being very explicit about whether they get done. The idea here is if the power cuts or something weird happens, you can look at the transaction log and you could say, okay, well, we were going to move this database to this location, and then the power cut and we never got any kind of log entry that said this was done. And so it's possible for the system to reconstruct where it was at and fix the problem. Okay, this is exactly what file systems do. When you're moving files from one location to another, it writes the intention that it's going to do that in the logs, then it actually does the move, then it says, okay, it's done, and if the power gets cut in between, you can pick that back up again. Okay. Now, if you actually turn on circular logging, then the transaction logs will get truncated. And what that means is that you're only going to be able to go back so far in terms of reconstructing things. So it's it's not generally recommended by Microsoft. I'll tell you in a second more about that. But transaction logs come in useful not just during downtime, but also during backups and other kind of situations where the database isn't actually available, but the system can keep logging the intention of what it's going to do, and then it can go ahead and do. Why are all the lights flickering? Okay, but basically, like if you're doing a backup or something, you have to freeze access to the database. And so you could still take requests from clients, you just can't commit them to the DB. So you can write them in the transaction log, the system will do that. And then when the DB is available, it'll just play catch up, okay? And so the user gets the impression everything's fine, and then eventually it is fine. So the content gets committed. Now, if you do truncate your logs with circular logging, then basically you can't do a full recovery, okay? So what happens then is you can only do point-in-time recovery options where you're basically recovering from a full backup or something like that. You can't perform incremental or differential backup operations as a result of implementing circular logging. So we don't really recommend it. Microsoft says if you really want to enable this, make sure you have 3 additional database copies in your environment live. Okay, so you have to have a whole ton of redundancy before they suggest that you actually turn this, enable this feature. If you do want to enable it, you can do it down here, go into the properties of it, and just enable circular logging. I'm just going to say, don't go there if you don't have to. Okay. Creating and removing mailboxes, EMS or EAC, you guys have probably done that. EMS and EAC, they'll both create the user in Active Directory, but it may not be exactly in the forms and details that you want, okay? Enabling a mailbox for an existing user, you can just do enable mailbox for that particular, and then give their username, and it's as simple as that. I like to go the 2-step method, and that's kind of what I teach in this class. Disabling the mailbox, same concept, disable mailbox, specify the user. What it'll do is it'll make it, it's kind of like when you delete a file, it goes into the recovery bin, into the recycle bin. You can get it back. The only difference is you only have a certain amount of time. Eventually it'll be overwritten, okay? So it will be permanently deleted at some point. If you delete a mailbox, that will delete the user. So be on your guard. I'm going to skip public folders here. Skip that. Okay, now send and receive connectors. This is kind of something which you may bump into. We're talking about SMTP here for the most part. You can configure this using EMS or EAC, but it's really a one-off, so I usually just do it with the EAC. Okay. There's no default send connector, so if you're trying to send to the outside world, you have to actually create one. Okay. And if you do that, you gotta. That's where Lab 1 is going to come in. You're going to have to set up DNS with MX records. We'll talk about that later. Okay. You can also send mail to a partner domain, so somebody internal that you're connected to for delivery, but that's a little bit different. You'd have to set up DNS between those two organizations in that case, and you're not going out on the internet, but we're not really covering that. Now, how does Exchange decide how to send stuff? Well, it depends on your environment, but if you've got a lot of different links to different sites, and you got different mail servers located in those, when it's deciding how it is to route data to get out, it has to look at what's, it's a theoretical term called the cost, okay? So that's a networking concept, and you're trying to go the least cost route to a particular destination. So this is something that it hashes out internally. You don't really have to worry about it unless you're trying to move things in a certain direction, in which case you can assign costs to particular links, and it will change the behavior of the flow of your traffic within your organization. Okay, so you can assign costs at a send connector. An Exchange will always use the lowest cost. So if there's a failure on that lowest cost connector, it's not going to try anything else. You actually have to kind of set another send connector to a lower value in order for that to pick up, and it's not that adaptive, basically. So it won't try to use another connector, but you can manually reroute through another connector, and then things can work. So here's an example. You've got site C, and you've got the internet, and it's trying to get out to the internet. When it's calculating costs, it's going to see that going to site A is a cost of 5, and going from site A to the internet is a cost of 1. So it's going to add those two up and say, okay, well, for me, that's a cost of 6, right? This is a cost of 10 and a cost of 1, so it's a total cost of 11. And so it's going to look at that and say that's too expensive. And then it could go over to site B, then to site A, then to the internet, but that's going to be a cost of 21, right? So it's always going to go this route. And if this route goes down, it's not going to switch over, okay? The only way you can change that is to change the cost. So you could increase this cost and then cause one of these to become more desirable that way, or you can reduce the costs here, and that will also change the flow, okay? Just something to be aware of. And then another thing is accepted domains. We're not really going to play with it at all, but you can add other domains to your Exchange in the case that you need it for whatever purpose. So if you acquire a company, or you start up a new one, or you just have a different organization, like at NATE, we have nate.ca, but we also had dmitsa.ca, right? So you can configure it so that you accept mail from those particular domains. There are different ways of doing that. There's authoritative, where it's full control. There's internal relay and external relay. So we'll get into those. When you do set it up, these are the options. The explanations are pretty straightforward here. So authoritative domain means that email is delivered to a recipient in this organization. So this mailbox server, this environment is the one that's actually going to deliver it to the end user, okay? Internal relay domain, it means that this mail server can get to the one that's actually going to house the mailboxes. And so it can accept on behalf, but it's going to then go on and deliver it to that other server, okay? External relay domain, that's when you're dealing with something like an organization that you bought out. They're on another continent or something like that. You can redeliver mail to them by forwarding it, but you're not really doing it through an internal network. It's going to go back out onto the internet. Okay. So when you're configuring accepted domains, you just want to make sure you're selecting the right one when you're setting it up. Okay, so configuring email address policies. We're not really playing with that too much either, but we've kind of done first name dot last name at domain, right? That's not the only way to do it. I don't know why, but you know, my username is msaunder. They cut off the S. I figured, oh, it's because it's too long, so they cut it off. But then there are people with much longer names. And that's because Nate's actually redone their mail address policies over time. So if I'm M. Sonder, Bart is Bardo. That's because he's been here for 35 years. Back in the day when he could just ask for that account, right? So it is possible to come up with different options, and Exchange actually offers you a whole bunch of different ones that you can choose from. You can also set up your own custom one. Okay, so if that kind of floats your boat, you know, you can just choose your own email address format. So first letter, last name, first name dot last name, first name dot last letter. It really depends on the size of your organization, whether some of these are a good idea or not, right? Like first name, last letter, terrible idea in a large organization typically. Okay. With Nate, we've had the problem, we have to insert numbers because we have like 20,000 students, right? So, you know, we have to come up with a custom type essentially. Let's see. These are just different mailbox server role policies. Let's see. That's just different different formats that we make for different domains. Message size limits, this can occur at different levels. So the organizational level, that's the whole Exchange server setup. The connector level, so if you're sending out on links that don't have a lot of bandwidth, you might establish a message size limit where you reject anything that's too large, right? And you can also do it at the mailbox level if you've got a user who is really abusing the system. So the best practice is configure the most restrictive message size limit where the message enters your organization, which is typically at the connector level. Okay, so this is usually where you want to do it. You could have a broader policy here and then just override it with individual ones, and then mailbox just for the abusive people, right, who don't know any better or don't care. Okay, I'll leave it there. Next class, I'll do a bit of a mad rush of catching up. So I'll do a couple of lectures, but again, I'll try and do them quickly. Okay. Anybody have any mail assignment 2 questions? Going okay? Pretty straightforward, right? More. Okay. No, except for SharePoint not downloading quickly. Yeah. And Nate, yeah. Okay. So I'll let you guys go. I'll kind of lurk in the background. If you need anything, just get my attention. Okay. Have a good one.